This is The Creative Funding Show, a podcast for authors, YouTubers, and podcasters who want to fund the work they love without selling out.
Welcome back to The Creative Funding Show. I am Thomas Umstattd Jr., and with me today is Rachael Herron, who's a best-selling author of The Ones Who Matter Most, which is an editor's pick by the Library Journal. Congratulations for that. As well as over 20 other novels and memoirs. And her latest nonfiction book is First Draft, Your Memoir, Write Your Story, Your Life Story in 45 Hours. We have links to both of those books in the show notes. She received her MFA in writing from Mills College, Oakland, and she teaches writing in the extension program of UC Berkeley and Stanford. She basically teaches everywhere where they teach writing classes. She's also a proud New Zealander as well as a U.S. citizen, and her Kiwi accent only comes out when she's very tired. So the question is, Rachael, how tired are you? Welcome to the show.
I'm good. I'm not too tired, so hopefully you won't hear the accent, although it is kind of fun when it comes out.
So tell us a little bit about how you got started writing.
Oh my gosh, I'm one of those cliches who, as soon as I knew that there was a person behind books, when I was a kid and I learned out that was a job, I wanted to be that person. But then I really got off track for a long time, and everybody told me you couldn't make money writing books, and I went to school for business and hated everything. Switched my major, finally did English, got my master's in creative writing, and then proceeded to spend 7 years spinning my wheels, not really writing much of anything. I was always trying to write the great literary, the great American novel, and putting, 500-page manuscripts into the desk drawer because nothing happened in them. They were just character sketches. They were really terrible.
I feel like everyone goes through that. There's this series at the beginning. It's kind of like when you get into a shower and you turn on the hot water. You just got to let the cold water flow through the pipe. It's like that bad writing. Once it gets out of you, there's good writing clogged up behind it. It'll come out eventually.
What a great analogy. I absolutely love that. Yes, that's exactly it. And so then my sister in 2006 told me about National Novel Writing Month, NaNoWriMo, which is this online challenge where you write 50,000 words in the month of November. And I proceeded to tell her that I was a serious literary writer and I would never stoop to something like that. And then, of course, as soon as she left, I was Googling it and signing up for it because
Secretly,
I really needed secretly, yes, I needed a kick in my butt to actually do some work. But in order to write a novel in a month, you have to write fast and you have to write badly. So for the first time, I really just got out of my inner editor's way and let terrible prose flow onto the page. And what ended up happening, and what happens a lot in National Novel Writing Month books, is that we write better than we ever thought we could, because we're out of the critic's way. And when I went back and looked at it a few months later, I thought, oh my gosh, well, this is kind of terrible. Yes, but it's revisable. It was the first revisable thing I'd ever written. And that ended up getting me my first 3-book deal with HarperCollins and an agent. So it was fantastic, and I haven't looked back since.
That's awesome. And that is a common story. Not that everyone, with their first manuscript from NaNoWriMo gets an agent, of course. But so many of the novelists that I talk with got their start or their breakout doing NaNoWriMo, partly because I think that it builds that discipline.
Yes.
To be a successful writer, you have to be a disciplined writer.
Absolutely.
The idea of like the binging, drunken writer, it's not really reality.
It's really not. Yeah. I mean, you might get some words done that way, but I don't recommend it.
That's right. It's romantic, and those writers die young and poor, and someone later finds their manuscripts and makes them famous. It's like, even when that does happen, do you really want that to happen to you? Do you want that to be your story?
I'd rather be healthy, yeah.
So what kind of books did you start writing after that initial trilogy?
So those were romance, and I wrote a lot of those real kind of feminist romances on the lighter side, brighter and happy. And then since then I've written a bunch of darker mainstream literary novels for Penguin, in which people die and families recover. Which I love. And I've written a memoir. I've written this nonfiction about writing memoir, because it turns out that teaching memoir is just my favorite thing in the whole world. Because when you teach memoir, you're teaching people not only the structure of story, but you're a lot of times teaching brand new people to write. Like that, not brand new people like babies, but brand new writers to write. These are people who have never tried writing before, but they have a good story. You know, they want to tell about their lives. So I just find that incredibly exciting.
And that's really important. And I feel like for a lot of authors, their first book is a memoir, whether they intend it to be or not. And if it's a novel, like the protagonist is very suspiciously similar to the author. And
that 500-page novel that will never see the light of day was just a terrible memoir. That's all it was.
Yeah. Even people like C.S. Lewis, right, who writes the Chronicles of Narnia, his first book was A Pilgrim's Regress, which everyone considers to be his worst book, and it's basically his memoir. And what's funny is that he revisits memoir later on in his career with like grief. He wrote one about grief where he basically just wrote about what it was like losing his wife. And it's brilliant, and it sells like crazy.
I have to read that, and I love him.
Yeah, but his initial book, like Pilgrim's Regress, I was, speaking at a C.S. Lewis conference, and they're like, read this one last. It's not his best work. I was like, well, gosh, if that can happen to C.S. Lewis, it can happen to anybody.
That's so cool that you were at a C.S. Lewis conference, though. How rad is that?
Yeah, he's very popular here in Texas. There's like 2 different organizations for C.S. Lewis, and they're rivals, and they throw conferences. But anyway,
wow.
It's very popular. Back to your books, though. So you're traditionally published. You've had a bunch of traditional contracts, but you're also on Patreon. So why?
And I'm also self-published.
And you're also self-published.
Yeah, I do. I'm now hybrid. I publish my romance mostly by myself. A Random House in Australia publishes some, but I really like retaining the control of the romance.
So, and is that the primary reason why you've gone hybrid, is to have that greater control?
Oh yeah, and it pays more.
The real reason.
Absolutely, yeah. You get 60 to 70% of royalties when you self-publish, and romance sells well.
Right.
So but literary fiction still doesn't sell that well self-published. It still is helpful to go through a traditional publisher, and I love my agent, so we kind of break it up that way. We're friendly about that.
That's a good way to do it. When people ask me what they should do, I tell them that the primary benefits of being traditionally published is that they give you contacts and credibility and capital. So if you need a lot of money, they put up the money for the editors and all of those things. But if you already have enough money from previous successes, and you already have the contacts from being in the industry, and you have previous successes that give you the credibility, you don't need those 3 C's nearly as much.
Absolutely. I've never heard it said that concisely, and that is absolutely true.
And so I fully support your breaking out into hybrid, because it's a very shrewd business move. And because since you're not needing those things, you don't need to pay them, because you pay a huge premium, right? The amount, a typical royalty is 8 to 20%, depending on your previous success and your agent and all these things. And when the best is 20% and the worst you're getting with self-publishing is 30% and the best is 70%, it's 2 totally different worlds.
Totally different games. Yeah. And honestly, for my traditional deals, I usually get closer to 8 to 12%. I actually make more sometimes on the Amazon affiliate clicks to buy the book than I do on the sale of the book.
Yes, that's so real quick for the people who don't understand, what is an Amazon affiliates program and how do you make money on that?
Anyone can do that, even if you don't have a book out. You could have if you set up an affiliates account with Amazon and you send out, say, a newsletter, or you have a website, you can say, buy this book. You can say, buy my book or buy someone else's book. Here's my affiliate link. And then what do you make on that? I think you make between 10 and...
It's between 4 and 8%, depending on how many units you sell. But it's between 4 and 8% of their entire cart. So if a reader buys your book and a new MacBook Pro...
Which happens!
Yes! Or a bag of dog food or whatever else people buy on Amazon, because they sell everything that there is to buy, you get a commission on that whole thing.
And typically November and December are people's best months, because that happens. They are looking at your book that you promoted to them, but also their shopping cart is full of all the Christmas presents.
It makes a good sense to do a Black Friday promotion on your book, if for no other reason than to get that affiliate cookie on people's computers so that they do their Black Friday shopping with your book in their cart.
So true. I'm going to do that this year. So true.
So talking about creative funding, that's a really easy and creative way to fund your book. But you're also on Patreon. So tell us a little bit, why did you start a Patreon page?
Okay, so I started my Patreon page a while after I heard about it. I actually wish I'd even jumped on it sooner, but it is not too late. I'm here to say I have friends doing this also. But it was about 2.5 years ago. 2.5 years ago. I was really needing to get out of my day job, and I was very close. I was a 911 dispatcher for fire and medical. I worked in the fire station, lived there for 48 hours at a time, went home for 4 days and then back for 2 days. And it was really I loved the job, but it was really taking a toll on my physical health, just, to go that long without regular sleep all the time. And I'd done it for 15 years since I got my master's, 17 years. And all that time I'd also been writing. And for the last 10 years, I'd been publishing books. So I was getting close to the amount I would need to have every month reliably. But there was just this little gap that I needed to fill. And I thought, boy, if I could make $1,000 a month reliably, that would really, really make me feel more secure. I know it sounds like a small amount in order to make a large jump like that, but I knew what I needed to bring in per month to keep, I live in the Bay Area, to keep our household going with my partner's salary as well. And so I decided to try Patreon. And the nice thing is that I already had readers, and that helped a lot, because if you have a couple readers, if you have 10 fans who want to read what you write, and you produce some stuff that nobody can get unless they're on Patreon, then they're going to support you.
Yeah, the key to crowdfunding is to have a crowd. It's not the place to find a crowd. This is a common mistake that people make with Kickstarter and with Patreon too, is that they think that, if I put my campaign here, people will discover my music or my writing or my YouTube channel through a Patreon. And that's not where people go to discover new content. That's where people go to fund the content they're already in love with, fund the creators that they're already familiar with. And so there is a certain amount of grunt work you have to do ahead of time, building up that following, building up that audience of people who know, like, and trust you before you're ready to say, okay, now I want you to back me on Patreon.
Yes. I think that there is some slow build, though, that you can do. You don't have to wait until you have a massive mailing list to start a Patreon. You can start it with a low number of supporters, but you have to be willing to know what you will do for them and how much time you're willing to spend on it. For example, when I started my Patreon, the concept behind it was I was going to write one essay a month. I'm on Patreon on the per thing model, not the per month model. So basically I have to produce a thing in order to get paid. I can do that up to every 4 weeks. So I'd really try to do that every 4 weeks. So
it's a good motivation to write that essay.
It's great motivation. What I was writing was essays on living the creative life, just on creativity in the brain and how we work as creative people. But I did the math, and I wanted these essays to start out being around 2,500 words, and I wanted them to be good, and I wanted them to be researched and well conceived and well executed. And I decided I did not want to do that every month for less than $500. And that's the cap I put on it. And that was basically the first goal. And the nice thing about that is I could open it up and people could pledge. And if I didn't hit $500, I made that my goal. I never had to do a thing. The Patreon basically was not a go.
And since you weren't creating the content, since it was a per thing model, it didn't zap everyone's credit cards. You're able to collect those credit card numbers in Patreon. So it's actually a really clever approach. It's kind of like Kickstarter's all or nothing deal. You're putting on a conference for $20,000 and only $2,000 worth of people, back your page. Well, the conference doesn't happen. No one is charged. Everyone is fine. Nothing is ruined. And that is because that's one of the scary things, right? What if you only have 20 backers on Patreon and now you have to do all of this work and to keep them happy? And so
yeah, no way. I don't have time for that.
Right. That's a good argument for the per thing reward model, is that it allows you to build up an audience without charging them if what you're doing is a lot of work.
I have to tell you, it funded pretty quickly, and which was awesome because I did have a nice mailing list. And for months, I was really busy. I was still working both jobs, and I would go 3 or 4 months without writing an essay. until one of my friends basically said, "You are literally leaving money on the table. What is wrong with you? That is money. It's not free money. You're working for it, but you're leaving it there." And I just thought, oh, okay, that's ridiculous. So I haven't actually missed a month since then. But if you ever notice on Patreon, if you're a supporter, if you're a per thing, you'll get a lot of things on the 31st in the evening because they have to be out by the 31st in order to get paid 5 days later on the 5th. So there's a lot of Patreon people who are busy on the 31st.
That's not a good day for Patreon's website to go down.
Oh, no, they would hear about that. Obviously, I don't write an essay on the last day, but I'm definitely putting the last touches on it that day.
Right. So walk us through the process of setting up the Patreon page for the first time. What was that like? What did you do, and what was your thinking going into it?
I had one main thing that I really wasn't that comfortable with yet, but I knew that I had to put together a friendly looking and sounding video because those were the Patreon campaigns that I had really responded to before. If you know N.K. Jemisin, she's a science fiction writer. Somebody had posted something. I think it was Scalzi. John Scalzi had posted, "You should go check out her Patreon. She wants to quit her day job," and her pitch was so compelling that I threw her $1 every month because she was adorable. I don't read science fiction for the most part. I don't need to ever keep up with her, but I'm really happy to give her $1 every month. And she was able to do it. It just took off. So I knew that I wanted to do a good video, and that's what I really spent the most time thinking about. And being very honest. I think that we get a lot of traction from being really authentic. And so I came forward and I said, "This is me. I write mostly fiction, but truthfully, what I love to write most is creative nonfiction. That's just my jam. And I don't have time to do that while I'm writing books. If this funds, this will pay for my time in writing these." And people just really responded.
It's a really good video. And for those of you listening, we'll have a link to her Patreon page in the app. So just scroll down in podcast app or whatever app you're using. You can tap to go view this video. And it's part of the reason why I invited you to come on the show. Because, as I was researching your page, I watched the video. I was like, oh, this is a well done video. It's a little bit longer than videos normally are, but you hold the attention, or at least you held my attention all the way through, and the audio was good. So and I think that that's really important. People need to be able to hear you in a very clear way. And how did you film it? Did you do it on your webcam?
I did it on my webcam on my MacBook Air, and I do have a professional mic that I use for podcasting. So I already had those two things for me. I'm much more comfortable with the video medium now because I do video podcasting as well. But back then, I think this was one of my very first attempts. So I'm glad it worked out.
Yeah. I will say, because I look at a lot of Patreon pages, and a lot of authors skip the video.
They shouldn't.
Think that they're really missing out when they do that. And they're like, oh, well, I don't look the way people think that an author should look. And it's like, that's not what matters.
And none of us do.
The authentic you is what people want to see. No one's wanting a supermodel on the camera. They're wanting you, and they want to know what you look like.
100% I can tell you that I gave to a Patreon campaign in which the woman's glasses were on crooked. And I was just like, she is so real right now. She is just being real, and she's talking about her passion. I was like, you deserve my $1, ma'am. I want authentic. That's what I want.
And I think that that's a really key point, because this isn't you reaching the masses. This isn't you selling your thousands of books to your thousands of readers. These are your core insiders. This isn't your concert at Madison Square Garden. This is your house party concert, or your house. What do they call it when it's a house concert? Like
house party.
Yeah, house party.
The
musicians have a term for that.
There is, and I can't remember what it is.
Yeah. But like being invited to that, or like the Beatles' last concert that was on the roof of some house, right? Like that's what this is. That's what Patreon is. And that's why people are paying the money, is that they feel like they get access to that inside-ness part, right? They get to see what your house looks like, and they get to see what you look like. And that access is part of the appeal. It's part of why certain people are going to want to come to your Patreon page. So
they honestly know that they're actually making a difference. And I make sure that I keep telling them that they're not, these $1 seem like such a small amount, but they just add up. to make a real difference in artists' lives. And that's what I love about Patreon.
That's right. And I don't know if you do this, but a lot of creators will reach out to every single patron when they first sign up and say thank you and like start that conversation. And that can be really powerful, although it's not scalable.
I don't know why I'd never even thought about doing that. That's just such a great idea. That's a light bulb moment. I'm going to start doing that from now on.
Yay. Well, there you go. So I started doing it and with the Creative Funding Show Patreon, which I'm doing just as a test bed. My real Patreon is the Novel Marketing Show, but I've already started getting guests from that. They're like, oh, or I'll go, somebody will back the Patreon and I'm like, oh, I check out their Patreon page and like, they're doing some creative things. Let's see if they'll be a guest on the show. And
oh, how cool.
reach out to them that way. And I found that some of our best interactions with our fans are the people who back us on Patreon, because these are our best fans. And I'm like, man, I'd love to talk to these people. These people are interesting and fascinating and they believe in what we're doing. And if you have patrons, they believe in what you're doing. And, it's great to interact with them. So back to your Patreon page. So you create the page, you create your video, you set up some rewards, which we'll talk about in a second. But how did you promote it? How did you let the world know about your Patreon page?
I did the thing on social media where I prepped people for it. I said, I'm going to do this. So I think that some people were actually on the lookout for it, which was great. I think I said like tomorrow I'll be launching it. And then I launched pretty quickly because I'm one of those people, I get a bug and I got to do it right now. And then I pushed out on all the social media channels, plus my mailing list. And I sent it to everybody on my mailing list, and I knew that I would get unsubscribes for it because that just happens. It's natural. But there were fewer unsubscribes than I thought, and that's really where the money came in immediately. I think I hit the 500 goal the first day or two.
Oh, very nice.
And then since then, it's just been growing slowly. And now I'm just looking at the page. It's up to $1,377 per essay per month.
Very nice. And I will say email is so powerful.
Yeah.
And it really does drive those numbers. How big was your list when you first announced it?
When I first announced it, I bet it wasn't more than 4,000 people.
And has it grown since then?
Yeah, it's about doubled. I'm more than 8,000 now, which I know to some people like in the biz might not sound like many, but I don't ever do newsletter swaps. I don't get any fans that do not self-select in. I don't go looking for them. You must go to my website and say, I want to know about Rachael in order to get there. So it's a really good group, and it's got a really high open rate on my emails.
Yeah, so it's like the 300 Spartans or the 8,000 Spartans.
Yeah, exactly.
So one thing you might consider is, and I talked with another guest about this, and she put it in practice, and her patronage doubled, or 50% increased in about a week, is to do like a pledge drive.
Oh my gosh,
there's a short-term reward where it's like everyone who becomes a patron in the next 2 weeks, and all of my existing patrons get some bonus. So like for you, maybe it's a bonus essay. So in a month you write 2 essays. Because what I found is that for a lot of Patreon users, they have people who are on the fence or who want to become patrons. They're just putting it off till tomorrow. And they'll put it off for tomorrow for a year. And all they need is that little sense of urgency. And suddenly you get a flood of new patrons coming in.
And I realized that I haven't actually asked people to join my Patreon since it started.
Oh, wow.
I'm very bad at things like that. I put the link in all my emails. It's there next to Twitter, Facebook, Patreon. But I have never done anything like that. So I think you're brightening my day with this. I'm totally going to do that.
So there you go. I feel like a good Patreon promotion model looks kind of like a heartbeat, where you got these big surges of attention, and then it's kind of and then big surges, and those big surges happen every year or so. And it works for PBS, National Public Broadcasting.
Yeah.
They do their big pledge drive once a year, and their whole push in that pledge drive is to get people to sign up on a monthly basis. It's not give us a big lump sum. And part of what that does is it also forces them to remind the people who've been giving every month why they're doing it. They're reminded, I feel so good about giving to PBS. And in a sense, the patronage model is for creating content, videos, and that's exactly what PBS has been doing for a long time. And they've learned a thing or two that we can steal some of their ideas.
I love that. And people like me eventually give out of guilt. You're like, I am still cooking dinner on the fourth night and I have not given yet. Yeah.
All right. So walk us through your rewards. What to take us through the $1 reward? What do people get when they give you $1 on your Patreon campaign?
Okay, so for $1, they all get a digital version of each essay as soon as it's released. It's the bare minimum. They also, I'm realizing it says here, they'll receive the MP3 of me reading the essay a month before it's released in podcast form. I actually never launched the podcast, and I generally do make an MP3 recording if I have time, but it's not on my priority, and it's not what people love the most. They really want the essay itself.
But what you're giving them is even more exclusive, because it's not a month before it's released in podcast form. It's the only way to get it.
It literally is the only way to get it. I should really clarify that. And then I say that their name will be listed in the acknowledgments of the 12 essay collection. And this is a good time to point out for writers, when you set yourself up like this, whether you're doing nonfiction or short stories, or you could, do chapters of a novel this way, if you were good about that kind of planning and plotting, you're giving yourself an advance for a book. Right now, my agent has the first 12 essay collection that she's taking out. The second essay collection is the one I'm writing right now currently. And it is about refilling the well. And I think I'll probably just self-publish that. I'll choose to keep that. But you're writing books. There's nothing that says that after you give this to your patrons, you can't reuse it into a book. So it's awesome. It's so cool.
Yeah, and it's another way to have your cake and eat it too, because I know some authors will release their book to anyone on any platform on Patreon, and then a few months later, it's Amazon Kindle exclusive with the KDP Select program with all of the perks and benefits and lock-in that comes from. So they're able to say, hey, if you want to read my book on Kobo, just back me on Patreon. You'll get your chance to get it on Kobo. But then after that, it gets locked into Amazon.
That's a great way to do it. But then I would push for going wide after that. I really believe in being wide with our books as much as we can.
This is a trend I'm noticing amongst the kind of people who use Patreon. They like to have lots of different sources of income. So
yes, absolutely.
Going wide has that advantage.
I do not want to put all my eggs in Amazon's basket, although they do pay most of my bills.
That's right. All right. So tell us about your $3 level.
$3 level. This is my favorite level. This is what I call the ACE level. They get all those rewards plus texts from me. And to share with your listeners, basically I text people 3 to 5 times a week through a service which doesn't share their phone number with me and doesn't share my phone number with them. I use something called remind.com. It is a free app that is for teachers. And basically you create a classroom. And it's supposed to be so that your, second grade teacher can communicate easily with all the parents before the field trip. But I'm also teaching people. I'm also a teacher, and your listeners can be teachers and create classrooms. And I can either go in and spontaneously send a text, or I can queue them up for the week and send them out at scheduled intervals. The nice thing is that people can text back, and it comes into my email inbox. So once I send the text, the responses will start coming back, and I can quickly jot back to them. So it really is a very one-on-one communication, and people know that if they text back to me, I'll text back saying, great, good for you, or, I'm sorry that happened. So I love that.
And I love that you're using a service, and we'll have a link to remind.com in the show notes for those of you who want to check that out. Because sending a text one person to one person doesn't scale at all, right? You have 82 patrons at this level, and if you had to send them all a text, individually, and then they're calling you at midnight or pocket dialing you, it's just a nightmare, right?
Exactly.
And yet with this service, you're able to have what is a very intimate form of communication. There's nothing more intimate than a text message, right? The people think about the kind of text you get on a daily basis. It's mostly from your most innermost circle, right? You're not getting texts from strangers. And it's not a violation for you to do this because they're opting in, right? The only reason they're going to pay you is that they want to get that text from you.
They want this. And of those 82 patrons who get those texts, I would say to every text that I send, I probably get 10 responses. And I generally respond back with a yay or a smiley face or something. It takes me seconds to do that as I'm, wading through my email anyway. And I mean it. I love hearing about their lives. They can send me pictures. Sometimes they send me little videos of things that they're looking at. It's fantastic.
That's great. And the other thing I love about that is that since it's text, they're not looking for an epistle from you, right? Sometimes with email, we get this in the Novel Marketing podcast. We have people will email us these big, long epistles of like big marketing challenges. And so we sometimes email back, right? We have lots of engagement, but it's a lot of work, right? It's not the same as like, oh, that's great, smiley face. That's a lot easier.
Exactly.
All right. So tell us about the $5 level.
At the $5 level, that is the star level. They get exclusive access to a question and answer video that I film in response. You'll notice there that I don't say that I do it every month because sometimes I don't. Sometimes I don't have questions. People don't send them to me. Often every couple of months, I'll send a Patreon note out to people just saying, if you've got any questions, I'll answer them. And then I answer completely honestly. There's nothing that they can't ask about either the creative process or about my life or whatever it is. So that is cool.
And you record that as a private YouTube video, and then you embed it in the Patreon post so that the only people who can find it are, because Patreon makes it really easy to say only $5 and above can see this video.
Exactly.
So
super easy.
It's fascinating to see how different creators use the Q&A, because this is a common tool. A lot of people do the Q&A, creation. And for some people, it's everybody gets it, right? Everybody, $1 or more gets the Q&A, and it's like Joanna Penn does it this way. And she gets, 40 minutes worth of questions, and she answers questions, and that's a big part of it. Whereas what you're doing here, it's video instead of audio, and it's a little bit more intimate. And all questions are answered, which is easier to do that when there's only 40 people, 50 people getting that level, where it's like you're now invited into the inner sanctum. Although
it really is.
Yeah, but the sanctums get even more inner. So tell us about the $10 level.
So the $10 level, that's the superstar. They get an exclusive. They get everything else, of course, plus the exclusive pep talk email on Living Creatively from me when each essay is delivered, and that's not very long, usually. And then I think more importantly than that, they get the digital e-version of the essay collection when it's complete. And that's actually something that will need to be, if my agent sells it, it'll just be written into the contract. How many people are there? There's 34, there's about 45 people who would get this, and they would just need to get the digital ARC. They would all get the digital advanced reader's copy because that's my agreement to them.
And even if you had to buy it at a discount from your publisher at $10 a month for multiple months, it still works out, right?
It absolutely.
You don't have to have the contract negotiated ahead of time with the publisher because, regardless of how it happens, it's still a good deal. And ultimately, they're not buying this because they want to get a discount, right? This is a really important thing.
They are not.
These aren't discount hunters. These are your core fans who are wanting to support you even more. And this is one of the things that surprised me with Patreon a little bit is that we have backers of the Novel Marketing podcast who back at a level higher than our highest level. Like they're wanting to support us at a certain amount. And so they're just picking the number, and even though there's no reward level even close to there, because they like what we're doing so much, they're wanting to help us out. And you have people like that. Potentially, the bigger your audience is, obviously, the more people like that there are. And they want to give you that money. And so you don't have to, like, sometimes with Patreon pages, people are like spending their whole day like, oh, I'll give you whatever you want. It's very exhausting for them. And it doesn't have to be that necessarily.
And I don't think it should be that. I really don't think it should be that. And that's funny that you say that. A couple of times I've met patrons in the real world, and one time I said, thanks so much for supporting me. I hope that you enjoy the essays. And she said, what essays? She had never noticed. She didn't care. She just wanted to support me, which is incredible. And I always tell people to put bigger rewards than you think will ever be picked up, just to see what happens. Like I put the $100 rewards and people pick them up.
Yeah. We saw that with Novel Marketing at our top level, which is sold out and isn't published anymore. You get your book featured on the podcast, and probably 30% of the people who backed at that level have not sent us their book name. They just wanted to back at that level, which has been really good for the other people because they're getting their books in rotation
Absolutely.
more often. Yeah. All right. So tell us about the $25 level.
25 is everything above, plus a physical signed copy of the book that comes out of the Patreon essays or the books, signed, mailed to them from me.
All right. And you have 8 people at that. And then you have the $50 champion level.
I've got one person at this, and they get everything of that, plus a signed copy of every single new book I release. And no matter what publisher, no matter if I do it, just mailed to them, sealed with a heartfelt kiss.
There you go. And now you have a $100 level and you have 5 people. So you limited this to 20 total. And so far, 5 people have backed you at the $100 level. What are you giving at the $100 level?
I just can't believe that people do this. Like, it's just like, this just opens my heart and fills it with so much love. It's amazing. At this, they get everything above, plus creativity coaching, 30 to 60 minutes of one-on-one time with me over a month over Skype. They get a recording of this. And I have to tell you that I think 3 of those people have never taken me up on that. One has never even responded to my emails, trying to get her to take, like she'll text me back, so I know she is alive. She'll text me back in those little texts. But when I say, would you like to get together on Skype? Nope, no response. It's just support.
That's awesome.
Isn't that beautiful?
That really, and it's really encouraging, right? When you're sitting down to write an essay, that there are certain people who are just wanting to support your mission, because these essays are, you're trying to say something with these that's not just like fluff. And people are wanting you to say that so much that they're willing to put down $100 just to make that happen.
It's incredible.
There's a level I've known some people do is like a mastermind call where everyone at a certain level is all together on a single Skype call. So you do them all at once. But with you don't really need to do that, since most of them, they're not doing it for the Skype call. They're doing it because they can afford $100 and they want to kick that in. So I love what you're doing with these. And what's really smart is that these are all very scalable. The one that's not, you very smartly limited, right? Because let's say 50 people signed up to have these calls. That suddenly is undermining your week. Even though it's really good money, it's keeping you from doing your actual writing because you're on these Skype calls all the time. And I remember a classic Kickstarter mistake. The producer of a indie film said everyone who backs for $100 or more gets a Skype call from me. And the indie film went viral.
Oh, no.
And they had like 1,000 people back at that level. And so he had what for an introvert like me is like my own personal hell of 1,000 Skype calls with complete strangers, one after another.
Awful. That terrifies me just to think of. But you've got to come through,
right? But imagine so you've got a lot of, and I don't remember what indie film this was, but you've got a lot of attention on this film. A lot of money's come in. People are really wanting you to make this film. But instead of working with the director and working with the actors and pulling things together for site locations and stuff, it's like talking to one and having what is it affect, I imagine, the same conversation over and over again, because people will ask the same questions and it's just like, please, never again.
God. That's when you want to hire your doppelganger to sit in your chair for a little while.
That's right. And I think the important principle here is you always want to ask the question, what if this becomes insanely popular? Am I protected? So there's the much more common fear is what if no one comes? And that's something you have to kind of have in your mind. But you also need to be like, what if Oprah mentions me on her things that I love, email or on her, whatever it is she's doing right now. And suddenly 1 million people come to this page. How can I handle that? Is this scalable if things get really popular? And you've done a great job protecting yourself.
Good. And I hope that Oprah does mention me at some point. That would be awesome.
Hey, you never know. Maybe she's listening to the Creative Funding Show right now. Her people are getting on the phone with you.
Or with you.
Yeah, there you go. What advice would you have? We're running out of time real quick, but I want to ask you, what advice do you have for people who are thinking about launching a Patreon campaign? They're kind of on the fence whether they want to do it or not.
Just like we were saying, limit yourself to your commitments until you know that this is going to fly. Don't make yourself spend a lot of work thinking, writing, doing any of this stuff if it's going to be for $3 a month. It's just not worth your time. Do consider that. I used to have rewards that I would have to mail, and besides the books, stickers and those kind of things. And it turns out that I'm just the worst person with the post office ever. I hate going there. I hate everything about it, and I'll put it off forever, and I'll let people down. So I got rid of those. Be willing to experiment as well. If something isn't working, you get to change it. I thought I was locked into writing these essays on creativity for the rest of my life until one of my wonderful patrons, Mariah and friend, said, just change it. You can change it. It's your Patreon. Your supporters want to support you. You're not locked into anything. You can always change these things.
I have a friend who has a Patreon campaign, and she had a podcast where she interviewed people who, had a story of change in their life, and it was an interview podcast. And she pivoted. She launched a new podcast that was a Pray Every Day podcast. She's actually one of the other guests we have on this show. And she changed her Patreon from the one podcast to the other podcast, completely different format. And she lost, as far as I know, 0 patrons because they were all backing her. And she has a lot more patrons now because people are like, we love the new thing that you're doing. We want to support it.
That's wonderful. That's exactly right.
And I think one last point that you brought up that I think is really important, and that is that you iterated. You didn't say stuck with your original goals. You took in reader feedback or patron feedback, and you adapted. And I think that that's really important, is that a Patreon campaign, any kind of crowdfunding campaign, needs to be a living creature. It's, you water it, you prune it, you fertilize it, like you let it grow, and hopefully it grows into something that it wasn't at the beginning. It gets bigger and more mature, and your needs get, more developed, and the tools are getting better. So word on the street is that Patreon is working on a solution for the mailing stuff to patrons problem so that there's some company or some way of doing that that's going to make it easier. So I don't think that's been rolled out yet. But once they do, and everyone gets a t-shirt that's the right size for them, that's mailed to them automatically, man, that's going to be really great when that's around.
No, that would be amazing. That would seriously be amazing. I also had a phone call with them at one point, and told them how much I love remind.com. And they, I know nothing about this, but they did sound really interested and intimated that they had thought about doing some kind of confidential texting service like that, because people really, really enjoy it. And, they don't want us using Remind. They want us staying within the Patreon world.
That's right. So, Rachael, thank you so much for coming on the show. Where can people find out more about you?
RachelHerron.com. It's spelled like Michael, Rachael, and patreon.com/Rachael, Rachael. And I'm always on Twitter, Rachael Herron.
All right. And we will have links to all of those places in the show notes. Rachael, thank you so much for coming on the Creative Funding Show.
Thomas, it was just a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much.